Hi, welcome to Chair Chats, the lifestyle talk show with a disability twist. I'm your host, Pauline Victoria. A basic necessity of life for everyone is shelter. But what do you do when you can't find a home that fits your needs? A home that doesn't require you to crawl to the toilet. A home that doesn't prevent you from fully participating in family pizza night. Unfortunately, this is the reality of many people with disabilities. But there are people and organizations who are trying to change that. Sarah and Scott Pruett of the Universal Design Project are working toward influencing the design process to include people of all types of needs. Please welcome Scott and Sarah, who are here to tell us what they're up to and how you can be a part of the process. Hi, Scott and Sarah. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We're talking about universal design, and the term universal design gets tossed around a lot. So for the sake of the viewers, I was wondering if you could define universal design for us.
Sure. So we use, we use the definition that was coined in the mid 1980s by an architect named Ron Mace. He was an individual who had polio. And the way that he defines the term is design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So simply put, what that means is it's design that works for as many people as possible, really from the functional side of things. So a design that's as functional as possible for as many people as possible.
And how are you doing that? How are you gathering what would be a design that would be functional for as many people as possible?
Sure. So I think the question to answer there is how do you figure out if a design actually is functional for as many people as possible? And the way that we've kind of come to the conclusion is to be able to connect with people who just have different functional needs and different functional experiences. It's really kind of looking at the broad spectrum of the disability community, people who have all sorts of different health-related conditions, people who have different kind of life experiences, come from different age demographics, and really just kind of being aware of who's out there in our communities and just how different people function, how different people use things within the home environment.
Okay. I guess what's different about our organization is, so I'm an occupational therapist, and Scott is actually a wheelchair user. He had a spinal cord injury almost 20 years ago. And so we have our perspective of kind of my background in OT and then his spinal cord injury. But like he's saying, there's so many different types of people with disabilities out there, and we don't understand everybody because we don't live their lives. And so what we really want to do is get people's perspectives on how they use different areas of the home, because we don't understand all of those aspects. And what we want to do is collaborate with occupational therapists, other healthcare providers, and people that design the homes, because we feel like when we can get all of those people together on one page and to talk, we can create something that's very functional, more than we could with just one OT and one designer, because we have all of those different perspectives.
So I understand that the Universal Design Project is also unique in the sense that you are trying to recruit people to kind of get their perspective of what their needs are, to get a broader view of what's required or what would be useful for as many people as possible. Can you tell me about that program?
Yeah, absolutely. So our design process, which we're still somewhat a young organization, so we're not kind of fully into this yet. But what we've done is we've kind of had to step back and question, okay, if we want to create homes or create anything that truly is as functional as possible for as many people as possible, what's the efficient or effective way to do that? And so, like Sarah said, it's connecting with people who have design skills. It's connecting with people who have a broad understanding of different health conditions, so people who work in healthcare. But then we've started building this other group. It's our volunteer group, and we call them our design advisors. So it's really people who can give advice about design. And the way that we are approaching it is these are people who have life experience with disability, either personally, professionally, or relationally, and they can really speak to the way that something is designed based on their experience. And so the idea is that you can present something to one of our advisors or all of our advisors and be able to say, hey, does this work for you? And chances are some people will say, yeah, that would be no problem for me. And then there are other people who would be like, well, no, based on what I know or what I've experienced, that may not be a good idea. So you should probably go back to the drawing board or consider changing this one little thing. And really the idea behind it is to build a diverse enough group that we can present some of the design work that's being done to the group that can then be kind of a sounding board to say, yeah, you're on the right track, or nope, you need to kind of reconsider and go a different direction. So we're constantly kind of recruiting and trying to build this group up. We've got between 40 and 50 people in there right now, so it's a pretty interesting mix of people. Some people are coming in from the healthcare side of things, so other occupational therapists, for example, who have worked with different populations. We've got some people who are more interested kind of in the older population, so looking at it from the gerontology perspective. We've got some people who are more interested in pediatrics, so understanding how kids and how parents and how families use spaces. And then we're really trying to kind of build up the mix of people who have different types of disabilities. So like myself and some other people that I know personally who have spinal cord injuries. I mean, we use wheelchairs, we interact with the home environment in a certain way, but then we're still kind of looking for other people who have just different types of impairments that affect the way they do everyday activities. So, I mean, everybody from hearing impairments to, I mean, people who have some cognitive difficulties. I mean, there's a huge diverse spectrum of people that we're really trying to connect with. So,
Right.
And then the goal with all of that information is to create home design plans that are really useful for as many people as possible, because we've had that input. And so those plans would be available on our website for people to use. So they could, whether a builder could use them, or someone with a disability could say, hey, I know that these plans have gone through their process, have kind of gotten the approval of people with a wide variety of abilities, and this would be a good bones, good house to start with. And then of course, if you have to add extra stuff in there for your specific need, that would be a lot easier than it would be for like a split level home or something that's currently on the market that doesn't have any of this thought process behind it.
Yeah, and so what's unique about our design process and the way that we're trying to approach things is that this advisory group, they're kind of the gatekeepers to saying, like, if we're going to release some work that's being done, like designers and OTs and other health professionals can work together, that's great, but it may not still work for as many people as possible. And so what our intention is to be able to say, this group is basically the group that needs to approve the way that this design work is done. And so if something's not as functional as it could be, or if it's not adequate for certain people, then we know about it before it gets released. And I think that's some of the challenge that we see in our communities today, is that you'll hear kind of universal design as a buzzword that some people in the home building industry use, or just different terms that are similar, whether it's like visitability or just different elements of accessibility and things like that. But a lot of people have different perspectives on that. And so if there's a quote unquote accessible home that's out there, I mean, who's it really accessible to? And what does that really mean? Does that mean that they've just made a home that doesn't have any steps, but maybe the bathroom just doesn't work for people who use a wheelchair, for example? It's one of those things that it's a challenge to truly design something that can work for as many people as possible. And so that's where we're saying, okay, it's really important to have this group of people who can say, that works, that's great, or nope, we need to reconsider before that goes out into the wild.
Huge group that you're trying to hit are the designers. And I know, just in my experience in advocating for people with disabilities, especially in housing, it's really tough. Like, you get a lot of resistance from mainstream society to even want to change the permitting process or even any codes. So you're trying to go from the design perspective and surpass all of the political or governmental type of requirements and maybe hit the designers. So with that thought though, what do you feel are the designers' attitude about creating designs that are more universal, and where do you want to see them go?
Sure. So I think there's a good kind of trend going on where people they're interested in being more inclusive, and I mean, whether it's kind of looking at it from whatever kind of diversity perspective there is. I mean, that's something that's quickly becoming something that's on the radar of people in design fields, and so like that's super encouraging to see. Our theory though is that it's really difficult for people to understand the functional side of design without the experience to understand actually what makes something functional and what doesn't. And so from the designer side of things, we're trying to really push the idea of designers working together with people who understand the functional pieces of it. And the way that can kind of come through in the market is hopefully, I mean, if we can create some examples of homes that are truly functional for as many people as possible, then there's an example out there that people can say, oh, that makes sense why all of these elements were done. And some of them could be really simple, like some of the common design characteristics that people understand are accessible and understand that are useful for everybody are things like, I mean, no steps to get in the front door. I mean, things that, I mean, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. But when you start considering the huge population of people that are out there who have different types of disabilities, and then the different ways that they interact with the home environment, that gets a little more complicated and a little bit trickier when you look at the activities that people do in their homes. So, I mean, the way a kitchen is designed, I mean, the traditional kitchen in America probably doesn't work for a lot of people. I mean, you think about, I mean, cabinets that are mounted up high, I mean, cabinets that are underneath of the sinks, and the way that the appliances are positioned and things like that, I mean, you could shuffle them around and they could be done a little bit differently, but there's not necessarily a way that, I mean, currently people could look at option A and option B and be like, oh yeah, option A obviously works for everybody, including people with disabilities, and option B is the traditional kind of status quo way of doing things. And so what we're trying to explore is really like what can be done if collaboration occurs in the design process, and then can we create examples that people can see and hopefully experience in person sometime to be able to see that, oh, this might be a better way of doing things.
It's interesting because we actually went on a trip. We went to an Airbnb in North Carolina with our family, and you know, our family knows sort of what we do, but I think there's some confusion in it. But we stayed at an Airbnb that was really accessible, universally designed. Here we go. There's all those words again. But we went in. And the kitchen was great. There was a raised dishwasher. You know, there was a bunch of different heights of cooking surfaces. And my mom walked in and she was like, wow, this kitchen is wonderful. Like, it's really well designed, and you know, I don't have to bend down really low to get stuff out of the dishwasher, and why don't they just build things like this? And we were kind of like,
and now you get it.
Yeah, like that's what we're trying to do. Like, and so we really feel like people need to experience universal design, because there are a lot of preconceptions of, because Scott uses a wheelchair, they think, oh, it's just designing for those types of people. And we're like, no, like the universal design really does benefit a lot of people and doesn't have to look medical. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, too, is collaborating with designers and helping them understand that as well, that, you know, it can work for people and look pretty good as well and be functional. Mm-hmm. So but yeah, I think having something that is able to be touched and people can experience it to make a big difference to help change their perspective.
Yeah, and so that's part of the challenge, is because, I mean, conceptually we get it, and people who have experience with disabilities, they get it. They understand that the way that something is currently can usually be better. And if it's kind of seen as the best right now, does that mean that it's really truly the best, or is there a way to improve upon it? And so one of the things that we kind of bring up as an analogy for people to help them understand is kind of the way that smartphones are kind of the most common. Currently, they're the most common piece of technology that almost everybody has in their pocket, in their purses, on their laps, and they didn't really hit the market until the early 2000s. And so if you were around before then, I mean, flip phones were all the rage, and the candy bar phones were all the rage. And I mean, if you had the Motorola Razr that was super thin, I mean, that was the cool phone. And there weren't people who were saying, hey, we really think a phone without buttons would be great. Like, we really think that if we could cram a computer into like this thing that you could fit into your pocket, that would transform people's lives. Like, it just wasn't something that was on people's radars. And so you didn't have people who were saying, this is really what we need. The phones that we have right now, they work, but they don't work as well as they could. And that's something that we bring up just as an example to say, like, we don't necessarily know what's possible until we really start exploring what can be done with design. And so going back to the definition of universal design, it says it's design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible. And so when we focus on that second phrase that says to the greatest extent possible, like, what does that really mean? Like, how can we really figure out how design can be as functional as possible to the greatest extent possible? Because if we say, well, this is how we do universal design, so that's it, and then have we really explored as far as we can go? And so that's part of what we're trying to do as an organization, is to get the right people together who have different perspectives and just say, how much can we explore that could be done differently? And so maybe if we're thinking about how a bathroom is designed, I mean, does it all have to be done the same way, where you have like the typical shower unit that you would go to the home improvement store and just buy something and just stick it in the corner, and then you buy a vanity or a sink unit that has the standard sink and the standard cabinetry? I mean, maybe all that works well, but is that the best option? And if you look at it from the design standpoint, like, what could be done differently if you understand the multitude of ways that people use these different products and these different features of the home? And just the more thoughts and ideas that get out there to say, well, what if we just explored it a little bit differently? Or what if we did something this way? Then who knows where we could go with that. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get to and trying to explore.
And I think what's interesting is that because we have a variety of voices speaking into this, you also have to think that everybody doesn't do the same, like, the task of cooking the same way. And so it doesn't mean that everybody has to approach, the stove the same way, or, the microwave the same way, or whatever the situation is. And so to be able to make something universally designed, can people do that task, but have the flexibility to approach the task in a way that is functional for them? And so that's why we need all of those different voices, because not everybody, puts on their shoes the same way, or, does their laundry the same way. So I think that's interesting to figure out throughout this process with everybody's perspectives.
Yeah. One of the misconceptions about universal design is that it's one size fits all. And in some ways it is, but it's not one size or one way is how everybody's supposed to do it. And so it's really taking into the consideration of the number of users and just the diversity and the different ways that people do everyday activities. And so if you can accommodate all sorts of different ways that people perform everyday tasks in the home, then all of a sudden you've made a big difference. You haven't said, okay, because we've designed this one thing this one way, this is how everybody has to use it. So
Right. It makes me excited to think that maybe in the future house of the 21st century is really something that's never been thought about. And I think, like, a lot of technology that has been developed primarily for people with disabilities and now has been adopted by mainstream society, that may be what happens with the house. And so I think if the more ideas, the disability community is great about thinking outside the box. Where could they go to contact you to be part of the process?
If anybody watching this is interested in being involved, our design advisor program, which we mentioned earlier, it is currently volunteer-based, and so if you just go to our website, universaldesign.org/volunteer, that'll take you to the page that has all the information about that program. And yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Scott and Sarah, for everything you do. If you'd like to be a design ambassador with the Universal Design Project, contact them. But we'd also like to know your thoughts. Please comment below on what your experiences have been in finding a home. Have you found an adaptation that has been useful and would be helpful to share? And what would your ideal home look like? Please comment below, subscribe and share, and if you'd like to see more videos from One Leg Up Productions, please support us at patreon.com/One Leg Up Productions. Thank you and be blessed.